Hello. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to have an angry face. Hello, Noelle, and hello, Lily. I might need to turn desktop audio down a little bit. Doing pretty well. How are you? Oh, and hello, Filky. Oh, I love this little dancing friend. I think I remember seeing them. Oh, thank you for the 9-month resub, Fuki. We get to see that cute snuggle gif. Let's see. I'm gonna go over a little cast. And then just hop right in because I'm a couple hours late, as usual. Not that I'm specifically a couple hours late as usual. I mean, all of us. We have time organization problems. Ooh, you started rewatching Soul Eater. That's exciting. We love Soul Eater so much. Obviously. You kind of... Well, I guess you don't have to love something to have a fictive from that thing. But usually. Hello, Faybot. So many people have showed up for the finale. Let's see. We have Scrappy as Petchka. We have myself as Clantail, Melville, and the narrator. We have Cuddle as Lapis Lazuli. We have Snuggle as Noko. We have Magenta as Flea. Scruffy as Shadowgale. Pookie as Keek. And Gadget as Fall. Let's see. I hope you like this ominous church music. When it gets towards the end of the books, I like to try to find like a slightly more ominous instrumental, but still relaxing to listen to. So I hope it fits. Melville. She had underestimated Petchka. For Petchka's magic to work, she had to be touching her target with her palms. And she also required 5 minutes to prepare, so her powers weren't usable in battle. Melville had figured as long as she wasn't foolish enough to let Petchka lay her hands on her for 5 minutes straight, her magic would be useless. She hadn't imagined that Petchka would be capable of such a wide area of effect. But no matter. It had been Melville's fault for giving her 5 minutes to spare at all, forgetting about her magic, and letting Petchka talk freely so that Melville could show off how unconcerned she was. She had been upset when the differences between her and Cranberry had come up, and she'd done a poor job of hiding it. If not for that, she never would have considered allowing all of Petchka's awkward babble. The beautiful musician of the forest had swooped down before Melville as she was hunting animals in the hills and fields with her handmade bow and arrows. Even the great bear, the god of the mountain, had been no match for her. She had admired the musician of the forest so much, yearned so badly to be like her, that her magical girl form looked just like the person she adored. Melville had admired Cranberry, worshipped her. But despite that, she'd chosen a different path from her idol. No, she'd been forced to choose a different path. Melville's magic was the power to change the surface colors of any object. She could erase what was supposed to be there and create something else. Her powerful ability could deceive her enemies' eyes, confuse them, and whittle down their strength. Melville's style was to mislead and trick her enemies, then shoot them down. But her magic didn't work on Cranberry at all. Even though Melville had learned to move almost soundlessly, Cranberry's hearing was sharper than her sight. She could sense the heartbeat of any living creature. If an object wasn't alive, then she could send out sonar-like waves to pinpoint its location. Magic that could only change appearances didn't mean much to Cranberry. Cranberry's identity was founded on her own strength. But Melville's core principle was that, Since she couldn't be as good as Cranberry, she would do things in a different way. She schemed. She deceived. She used surprise attacks and assassination. Temporary alliances. Money, too. As long as she could win, that was enough. The strongest of all was the last one standing. But Melville never got over it. After all her training and battles, she was no longer a rookie. But even as she was getting closer to Cranberry, she felt more and more like she would never catch up. The strong rule in the mountains. Magical girls were the strongest and greatest of all. The strongest of them would truly be the greatest. Melville had been chosen as a magical girl through Cranberry's exam, and afterward she would cooperate with Cranberry when needed. Unlike the other magical girls, her memory had never been erased. It had been Melville's wish that she retain her memories, and Cranberry had granted it. Melville wanted to be able to beat Cranberry one day. With that desire in mind, she had continued on as a magical girl until she hit a wall she could never overcome. Then, while she was busy struggling, Cranberry, the one who was supposed to have been the strongest of them all, had been killed. When Cranberry's deeds were exposed, the authorities had caught Melville too. Before she was even over the shock of Cranberry's death, her qualifications as a magical girl had been stripped from her, and she was back to being only a girl. Then this game had begun. Someone had returned her powers to her. She had regained her identity as admirer of the musician of the forest, Cranberry, her strength, and her way of living. Scanning the other participants, she noticed a number of familiar faces. They were the victors Melville had never seen before when she'd helped Cranberry with her exams. Some were examinees whose names had been written in the records Fav had left behind. There were also a number of new faces there as well, but Melville was certain they were all victors of Cranberry's exams. Someone had gathered all these girls who'd passed and forced them to play a game. In other words, this meant Cranberry was alive, right? No one but Cranberry would have done something like this. Either her death had been a lie, or she had faked it herself. Cranberry was so strong, there was no way she could have died, Melville had thought with joy. The other girls had seemed to think this game was exactly what it seemed. No surprise there. They'd all forgotten. But Cranberry would never make them play a game that was entirely safe and secure. They'd been told that they should cooperate to defeat the evil king, but Cranberry, of course, would have wanted them to do something else. She had gathered the victors here to make them play, so as to select the true victor from them all. Of course, Melville had to be the winner. Melville pretended to be a regular participant while she went around killing the other players in secret. If she'd fought Masked Wonder head-on, the other girl would have been a great challenge. Seeing her face off with Churnamouse had been enough evidence of that. She wasn't an opponent to fight, head-to-head. It was best to take her by surprise. Melville had been glad when Akane had taken herself out of the running. In the hospital, Akane had been seething with hatred for Cranberry and apparently still remembered bits and pieces. She'd gone around saying, "Musician, musician," at every opportunity, so Melville had been worried she might cause one of the others to remember. Speaking of dropouts, Genopsycho and Magical Daisy were responsible for their own deaths too. Both Genopsycho, who could nullify any attack, and Magical Daisy, who was very experienced and used powerful one-hit KO magic, were troublesome enemies. The removal of those two had been a big help to Melville. Musician, musician. Fabot is a Pokemon. Oh, also, that was a little guest appearance from Hollow, whose character had been killed off in the first part of the first book. Or, not the first book, but the first of these two books of Arc 2. So the second book. Fabot, man. Cherna had been manageable and easy to control. By using her to monopolize hunting grounds, Melville had sown the seeds of discord between the parties and slowed down the exchange of information. She had considered using Cherna up until the end, but when she saw Cherna crush Flea's tank, she changed her mind. If Cherna had turned on her at any point, it would have been too much for Melville to handle. Gotta catch a fae. Gonna start whispering musician whenever Meadow is near. At Meow Meow, it had seemed as if her memories were beginning to return, perhaps triggered by the things Akane had said. Though she had genuine strength even without her memories, and was able to battle it out with Akane and win. Melville had used Genocyco's body to finish her off. At Meow Meow had felt strongly for her allies, so to kill her, Melville was forced to use those allies to lower her guard. Melville had let them get a glimpse of Genocyco beforehand and left the warning message that there was a traitor. She had also created a wound on the face of the fake Genocyco. Then later, when she had made Rionetta control Genocyco's body, Melville had erased the injury, suggesting that Genocyco had survived, and that At Meow Meow was the traitor. Melville had used Rionetta because she had seen her exam in full, and she knew how Rionetta made her living. She was basically an assassin who only worked for money. Of course, Rionetta couldn't let the Magical Kingdom know about that. Melville had sneaked into Rionetta's house to leave 3 million yen in cash on her table. When the game had started up again, Melville had revealed that she'd been the one who gave it to her, adding that she hoped it would help repay Rionetta's father's debts. Melville had lured her with money while also implicitly threatening her. She knew where Rionetta lived and about her family. That was how she had used Rionetta to eliminate At Meow Meow. As for the remaining magical girls, there was Flea. She was all talk, and she'd lost her wheelchair too. Shadowgale. If that 10-legged tank was the best she could do, then no problem there. Nonoka Miyokata. It depended on the monsters available, but Melville could kill her, even 2-on-1 against her dragon. Detect Bell. Not only was her magic unsuited for battle, she could hardly use it at all in the game. Petchka. Out of the question. The only tough one would be Lazaline. The previous Lapis Lazuli had been one of the top veterans among the victorious survivors of Cranberry's exams. She'd been a shrewd old hag, and even before becoming a magical girl, she'd never let her guard down for a second in her life. Since the old Lazaline had picked her out, the current Lapis Lazuli would be no weakling, and her keen intuition would be a threat to Melville too. How to eliminate her? That was the point when all the players' memories had returned and Melville had lost her advantage. For she had only managed to kill Detect Bell instantly and steal her phone, but it was too late for that. Now that it was all out in the open, Melville couldn't hide herself among the players anymore. Her appearance had been born from her desire to be just like Cranberry. Her vines, roses, and pointed ears were already the same. She probably wouldn't be targeted immediately based purely on her resemblance, but they would certainly be very suspicious of her. She couldn't stay hidden any longer. Fabot's definitely a Pokemon. Nintendo can't deny it. Melville had made a mistake in underestimating Petchka and paid for it dearly, but that didn't make this an instant game over. Melville stabbed Petchka with her javelin and finally slipped away when the other girl's grip loosened. She made herself invisible and escaped, and immediately afterward she heard something hit the lake, along with a spray of water. It was Clantail. She'd come in through the hole Petchka had made, her lower body a fish. No, a dolphin. She kicked through the water with her large tail, straight for Petchka. Melville ignored Clantail and swam for the shore, deftly erasing drips of water, her footprints, and herself as she went. Making it look as if nothing had been there, she circled the lake. Clantail was using her magical phone. She had to be trying to heal her companion's injury. Petchka was alive, barely. Melville had to make sure the stab wound wouldn't kill her immediately. Still invisible, Melville moved around the lake's edge to come behind Clantail. With Petchka in her arms, she wasn't watching out for Melville. Her unguarded back made a very nice target. If Melville used her bow, the sound of her pulling the string back might alert Clantail. Even if she was no cranberry, all magical girls had keen senses, which of course included sharp hearing. And besides, no matter how big this cavern was, it was still an enclosed space. If she triggered a cave-in and got trapped in here, Melville would be helpless. Now she could use her javelin the proper way and throw it by hand. By the time Clantail noticed it flying toward her, she'd be impaled by the transparent steel. Oh, Scooper, do you like Clantail? Slowly and soundlessly, Melville raised her weapon, then hurled it at Clantail's back. There might still be hope, Scooper. Petchka. When Petchka opened her eyes, she was in Clantail's arms. Following her memories back, she recalled being stabbed by a javelin, and she looked at her own stomach. There was a hole in her clothing, and the area around it was all red, but she wasn't in pain. There was no spear. She tried touching the spot and found no wound. What a relief. Clantail was smiling. She seemed about to cry. Petchka was in her arms, so their faces were close. Glancing at Clantail's lower body, Petchka saw it had transformed into a dolphin. It's one of her cuter transformations. I'll classify that one together with the deer and the pony, Petchka thought, her mind still hazy. Just then, she suddenly got a whiff of something. The smell was exactly like the one hovering over them and on Petchka herself, and it was circling the lake. Petchka looked around, but she couldn't see anything that could be the source. Before Petchka even realized what was going on, she acted. She wrapped her arms around Clantail's shoulders and reversed their positions in the water. A brutal impact hit her back. She felt like her body would be torn apart. Meow. Pain, heat, cold, agony, fear. She fell into the blackness together with all these negative feelings. But one single thing inside her shone beautifully. Petchka had finally been able to act. She had been able to protect her dear friend. Satisfied with this result, she silently closed her eyes. Her friends were there, behind her eyelids. Her family, too. Nonoko and Rionetta were fighting, and Clantail was trying to make them settle down. Ninomiya was there. That girl who was so much like him was there, too. They were all smiling. Petchka smiled. It was nice. This was fun, and she was glad. Melville. Petchka had gotten her, yet again. Her javelin should have pierced Clantail's back, but Petchka had spun around them so that it hit her instead. Now Clantail was aware of her enemy, and before Melville could fire off a second javelin, she dived down into the water with Petchka. Yes, it was Petchka again. Melville spat on a rock. She tried to calm herself, but she was so irate that she was ready to boil over with humiliation and rage. Clantail hadn't noticed Melville, but Petchka had. She detected Melville's presence, sensed what she was doing, and blocked the spike Melville had thrown at Clantail's back. There had to be a reason why Petchka had been the only one to notice. Melville's movements had been entirely silent. No one could have sensed her, unless their hearing was as sharp as Cranberry's. The only thing besides sight and hearing was scent. Perhaps just as Cranberry's ability to control sound conferred upon her a powerful sense of hearing, Petchka's cooking abilities gave her an amazing sense of smell. Coming up with an explanation for her failure enabled Melville to finally calm her heart. She took another lance in hand. No matter how many she threw, she would never run out. The surface of the water was still. Clantail was still in her dive and didn't rise. Was Petchka alive or dead? Melville had felt that hit. She was probably dead. What would Clantail do when her teammate died? she would attack for sure. But Melville had concealed her presence, and Clantail had no way to find her. Melville touched her hand to the bare rock face. She couldn't sense any movement within the water. She figured she should run. Out in the wasteland, she'd be unbeatable. She would rather not fight underground, given the choice. There wasn't enough space. If she threw her javelin hard, she was bound to cause a cave-in, and then she'd be the one getting trapped and injured. But running away now would allow the survivors to meet up. She would much rather take them out one by one. Whittling down the enemy's forces was clearly better than fighting them all at once. Melville looked up at the roof. Petchka's magic had opened a large hole above them, and in her scuffle with Clantail, for the first time in the game, Melville had pulled the bowstring back as hard as she could. The rare items she'd acquired, thanks to the miracle coin, the power talisman, and the bow of the evil god, had enabled her to destroy one of the buildings and form a crater. That power was good, but that sort of dramatic destruction might have drawn attention from the other magical girls. It would be best if she could kill Clantail surreptitiously. The surface of the water shifted and rippled. Melville focused. If she flung the javelin straight at Clantail's face, that would void half the point of going invisible. Rising up to her tiptoes, she curved her spine. She mastered the art of moving silently in an attempt to catch up to Cranberry, but ultimately that had not been enough to surpass Cranberry either. But it had built the foundation of Melville's combat style. Clantail's head floated to the surface 20 yards from the opposite shore. Her shoulders and torso emerged, and she was cradling Petchka. The girl was still in Clantail's embrace. Her limbs were loose and limp. Clantail's head was drooping, so Melville couldn't see her expression from where she was standing. If she was holding Petchka, that meant her arms were occupied. Circling around to Clantail's right side, Melville observed Petchka. Blood flowed from her back, staining Clantail. Her wound hadn't healed, and her face and arms were beyond pale. They were ashen. Melville had seen the same thing many, many times during Cranberry's exams. Petchka was dead. With her lower body still in the water, Clantail was approaching the shore. It would be best to kill her before she left the water, since on the lake her movement would be limited. Positioning herself at Clantail's right flank, Melville adjusted her grip on her javelin. About 130 yards to her target. It was a good distance. She readied her javelin, and the instant before she threw, her eyes met Lazaline's. Lazaline? A crushing sense of unease washed over Melville. "Are you really the evil king, Melvy?" Lapis Lazaline was right beside Clantail. She was facing Melville and speaking to her, even though she had to be invisible. Her eyes were filled with pure anger, and her face was twisted in a glare. This was the first time Melville had ever seen Lazaline angry. Melville retreated half a step. She was overwhelmed. Though only for a moment she was confused. Melville's speciality was creating something from nothing. None of the other magical girls here could have done something like that. Clantail's head turned to follow Lazaline's gaze, toward Melville. Lazaline threw a sparkling blue orb, teleported toward it and caught it, then threw it for another teleport while she was still in midair, and then she was standing right in front of Melville. "Are you seriously the evil king, Melvy? Are you the one who killed Belle?" she asked, facing the invisible and silent Melville. Lazaline could tell where she was. Melville took a deep lungful of moist, underground lake air. If Lazaline was going to give her a moment, then she would use it to suppress her rising confusion, discomfiture, and shock. Back when they had been exploring the Evil King's castle area, Lazaline had given Clantail a gem. Insurance in case Lazaline was suddenly attacked up front. Had Clantail returned that gem to Lazaline? At the very least, Melville had witnessed the exchange. Clantail had dived into the water, not only to avoid Melville's attack and attempt to heal Petchka. She had been sending a plea to Lazaline for help. Leslie had responded and teleported to the gem in Clantail's possession. The question that remained was how Lazaline knew where Melville was. Melville threw a javelin, which Lazaline dodged easily before making a beeline for her. Was it intuition? That was all? Melville shot a look over to Clantail. She was already just about at the shore. Clantail's magic was to transform her lower body into any non-human creature. That could be a mammal, reptile, amphibian, fish, or anything else. As long as it was alive, anything went. However, any creature that she transformed into would never have anything above the neck, because that was where Clantail's upper body would be growing. Melville knew all about Clantail, since Melville had assisted Cranberry in her exam. Clantail had transformed into various animals then, but all of them had been only from the neck down. She had never transformed into an animal with a head. An animal's sensory organs were generally situated above the neck. Some odd cases might have them on the legs or torso, but those creatures didn't have particularly potent senses. None of them would be good enough to detect Melville when she was moving silently. A snake's ability to sense heat, a dog's sense of smell, and a bat's sonar would all have been a threat to her, but Clantail would have needed the head of the animal to use those sensory organs. For that reason, Clantail's magic didn't pose a substantial threat to Melville. If she defeated Lazaline first, her chances of victory were good. Clantail gently laid Petchka's body down on the shore. Lifting her head, she looked at Melville. With an expression more bestial than any animal, she glared. "Melville!" She howled, charging. Her lower body was a lion. She'd most likely not chosen a horse because she figured hooves would be dangerous on the slippery rock, and she was soaked too. Clantail's approach was swift. Even if she couldn't see Melville, Clantail would know where she was because Lazaline was fighting her. She would be forced to fight 2-on-1. After turning aside Lazaline's punch, Melville blocked a kick with her longbow. She had no time. Melville changed all the colors of the rock surface around Clantail to a perfect black that reflected no light. Now Clantail wouldn't be able to see the irregularities of the ground, making it extremely difficult to run. Would she slow down, simply abandon herself to anger and race full speed only to stumble, or would she hesitate momentarily? Melville had to buy some time, no matter how brief. She would use those moments to kill Lazaline. Slurpy slurp. Melville swiped a jab away, then deflected each part of Lazaline's jab, hook, uppercut, straight combination with the back of her hand or palm. She tossed her longbow aside. In close quarters, it would only get in the way. She thrust the javelin in her right hand at Lazaline's feet, but Lazaline blocked the stab with the bottom of her foot. Melville couldn't sense that her invisibility put Lazaline at any disadvantage, even though she couldn't have seen either Melville or her javelin. "Hello, Scronin, welcome." Lazaline had said her intuition had always been sharp, but the previous Lazaline had polished it. Melville couldn't help but think that the old Lazaline had anticipated a battle to the death against multiple opponents. Lazaline could dodge attacks from behind. She could sense attackers, even when taken by surprise. She could see through traps, and of course, she was a talented fighter, too. 1 second had passed. What had the previous Lazaline been thinking? That hag had been cunning and tenacious. What had she been thinking, training a magical girl who carried her name for a murderous battle, training her hard, while she retired carefree? She'd just been preparing a scapegoat for when something happened, hadn't she? This girl, designed for a battle royale, had sharp fists. She was precise and never hesitated. She hit Melville's shoulder, grazed her cheek, and cut off a chunk of her hair, which floated away. Melville stopped, trying to be silent. She let the sounds of her movement, Her clothing, breathing, everything make noise. The two girls punched each other, exchanged blows, thrust, stumble back, spin, back fist, counter with an elbow. Melville hit Lazaline on the wrist to block, but couldn't slow down the strike and got hit on the neck. Unflinching, Melville thrust out her javelin and skewered Lazaline's thigh, holding her in place to drive a heel into her right foot and break it. 2 seconds passed. Lazaline didn't cry out. She didn't even show a hint of pain. Without hesitation, she crushed a gem in her right hand and scattered the fragments. Before Melville could understand what she was doing, Lazaline had vanished, and Melville was taking a punch in the back. Her ribs cracked. It had hurt her kidney, too. Melville swung her javelin around to the rear, but Lazaline wasn't there. Melville raised her arm to block a hit aimed at her temple, but when she tried to strike back, Lazaline was already gone. After a hit to the torso, Melville staggered. She predicted the following attacks to her shoulder, arm, and thigh, so aside from the first shot, she somehow managed to avoid any major damage, but she couldn't manage to strike back. She was being kicked and punched from every direction, as if she were the center of an angry mob. Lazaline was only one girl, but she seemed like a crowd. The fragments of blue gems sparkled as they rained down. Each one of them was a deadly weapon. Lazaline teleported from shard to shard, again and again, her after-images layering over each other. She wasn't giving Melville the time to strike back. 3 seconds had passed. Melville fell to the ground, unable to withstand Lazaline's flurry of violence. She fell awkwardly on her back. Or so she made it seem, but of course that wasn't the truth. Pain or injury couldn't rob Melville of her will to fight. Everything she did was with victory in mind. Cowardly or dirty though it might have been, Melville had chosen a way of life that would never shame her to Cranberry. By putting her back on the ground, Melville had eliminated her greatest blind spot. The solid cold of the rock surface seeped into her cracked ribs. Lazaline was sure to reveal herself in order to get one final hit on Melville, weakened and downed. That was when Melville would strike. But a single attack wouldn't be enough to win. If you considered her opponent's injuries and her own, Lazaline revealed herself, and simultaneously Melville did, too, and added color to her previously invisible body. She mixed up geometry, color, and shadow to create a deceptive image. Lazaline's foot thrust out, ready to stomp down on Melville on the ground. Melville thrust her javelin out, crossing past Lazaline's leg to pierce unerringly through her ribs and her heart behind them. Lazaline looked down on her. Melville, awkwardly sprawled on her stomach, was reflected in her furious eyes. When Melville had been invisible, Lazaline had been landing accurate hits. Suddenly seeing her, lying on her face, Lazaline had become just a bit bolder. In order to make her final strike to Melville's vitals, her forward lunge had been a little larger, and that had allowed Melville, who was actually lying on her back in weight, to connect with her javelin first. If Melville had presented to her a completely fake image with no real body present, Lazaline would probably not have fallen for it. But Melville had only made it seem as if she were flipped over the other way, though she had actually been in that spot. Using herself as bait, she managed to create just the smallest opening in Lazaline's guard. Lazaline, her heart pierced, had landed her stomp too, but it was weaker, and she had missed Melville's vitals. 5 seconds had passed. Melville had made it. Plantail wasn't there yet. Lazaline collapsed, and Melville stood to trade places with her. Immediately she made herself invisible. Lazaline's defeat didn't mean this was over. Melville erased the blood splattered on Lazaline, as well as her own blood, everything. All that she left visible was Lazaline herself. Once Clantail approached Lazaline to save her, Melville would have this in the bag. She would stab her with her javelin and end the fight. A vibration in the rock surface. Clantail had launched herself into the air. She was leaping over the black ground. Foolish, that made her an easy target. Clantail was 20 yards away. Her lower body swelled, about to transform right there. But no matter what she tried to shapeshift into, she wouldn't make it in time. No animal could attack from so far away, or close the distance faster than Melville's javelin. The lance would stab her first. Clantail's swollen lower abdomen split. Tough, shining red scales appeared, and she flung her forelegs out in front of her, each claw sharp and as large as a small human. Her tail was as thick as an oil drum, as long as multiple people lay head to foot. She extended a pair of wings massive enough for such a body. They flapped hard enough to make waves on the surface of the water. Melville remembered. There was no way she could forget this. It was the great dragon. Clasping her javelin, Melville's hand trembled. She couldn't steady her aim. She knew she should aim for the upper body, but Clantail was high above her, her great lower body concealing her human parts. This wasn't a situation Melville could fight in. She should stay concealed and get out. The great dragon was so big, Melville couldn't expect to do much damage throwing javelins by hand. She just had to get some distance. A shot from her longbow, which could destroy buildings and blast craters into the earth, could pull it off. When Melville tried to get away, something gently brushed her ankle. It was Lazaline's hand. She was still face down on the ground in a pool of her own blood. She was dead. What Melville felt against her ankle was a dead person's hand. The body heat was bleeding out of her. But she had moved. Was it out of obsession? Malice? Before Melville could find it, the great dragon gave a horizontal swipe with its claws. It sliced Melville, still invisible, into chunks, and flung them into the lake with a spurt of blood. Shadowgale. After splitting with Flea, her back felt strangely lighter. She had zero intention of opposing Flea's order to run immediately if she felt she was in danger. Shadowgale moved forward slowly, observing closely for anything abnormal that might be even the slightest bit off. Speaking of odd, Noko's disappearance was bizarre, in and of itself. Noko had been running at the tail end of their group, so she had to have seen Lazaline disappear. There was no reason for her to fail to mention Lazaline's absence, and then silently withdraw from the line. Aw, you liked Melville? I'm kind of honored since she was trying to be so much like me. In Shadowgale's left hand was the dragon shield, and in her right she held the +7 wrench. Ready to respond, no matter who attacked or from where, Shadowgale was not running along the vast wasteland, but walking. Noko's icon was close. There was a high-rise about 100 yards ahead. It was near there. Maintaining her pace and staying as alert as possible, Shadowgale approached the high-rise, and then she was there. She touched the wall of the building. The texture was rough. It was just another dilapidated structure, nothing special about it. I'm sorry, the line "the texture was rough" makes me think of the Sonic Freeriders fandom. What's it feel like? It's rough. Okay. It was no different from the other countless, decrepit edifices dotting the wasteland. It was just a game object. She checked Noko's position with her magical phone. It had not changed at all since Shadowgale had first launched the map. Noko was still there. Shadowgale tucked her phone into her pocket and took her wrench in hand. The party location function in the map app didn't indicate the person's location, but rather the location of their device. It was very possible to turn a magical phone into bait to lure her into a trap. Whether or not Noko would do such a thing herself, it was also possible someone else would use her phone to that end. Shadowgale slid along the wall, circling around to the front of the building. She slowed down further, cautious, careful, inclining her ears to even the slightest sound, taking smooth steps. It was silent. She noticed no sounds, but she did smell something. She remembered this. The final floor in the subterranean area, where all magical girls had fought each other, came back to her mind's eye. This was the smell of something burned and scorched. When she reached the front of the building, Shadowgale peeked inside. There was a black lump there. It wasn't clear what it had once been. It was just a cinder the size of a human torso. The soot-black floor around it had to mean this thing had been burned up here. Beside the lump, a magical phone lay on the ground. Something was attached to it. When she saw it, Shadowgale immediately closed her eyes. She had been careful and cautious up until this point, but right when it counted most, she was closing her eyes. Was it because she wanted to unsee what she just witnessed? Or was she just averting her eyes from reality? A girl's severed hand clasped the magical phone tight. It was burned coal black from the wrist halfway up the back. Only one of the players had a hand of that size. The image of that hand, still so small, was burned onto Shadowgale's eyelids, and shutting her eyes wasn't enough to erase it. Master's Side, number 10. Let's see.
Hey, I've been waiting for you.
The new automatic door opened quietly and smoothly, inviting the guest in. The girl had designed it to do that. Though it was obvious and taken for granted that the door should slide quietly and without friction, the girl nodded in satisfaction. The magical phone lying on the table activated, and an artificial voice cried,
"Snow White!" "Shut up. You're obnoxious."
A snap of the girl's finger, and the phone turned off. The guest looked from left to right. She might have been cornered about the black screens on the abundance of monitors. Because of that, the room was dark, and the only source of light was the glow from beyond the frosted glass door. The girl swept her arm across the table, knocking everything to the floor. The monitor, notebook, magical phone, pencil stand, and pen hit the ground with a poof of dust. The girl rose from her seat, spread her palms with a smile, and indicated a chair before the table.
Sit,
she said, ushering in her guest. The magical girl in white, Snow White, took 3 steps forward from the entrance, pulled back the chair, and sat. The girl snapped her fingers, and on top of the table appeared a porcelain saucer and cup, pure white like fresh snow, and the cup was filled with a liquid the color of young leaves.
"You didn't touch the cafe au lait the other day, Snow White, so I tried making some green tea."
Snow White showed no gratitude for the girl's kindness and made no move to touch the drink. The girl closed one eye. She seemed less offended and more amused.
"The truth is, the game is just about over."
For the first time, Snow White's expression changed. The girl studied her surprised guest and opened her closed eye. She then nodded a couple of times and brought the tea to her mouth.
"That's the truth. No jokes and no lies. Will the evil king win, or the players? Only a little longer and the game will be over. Now we just need to see the results. I wonder what'll happen. What do you think will happen?"
Snow White's expression had already evened out again. She didn't reveal her emotions. The girl said,
"It's surprisingly bitter,"
and placed the cup down on the saucer.
"Of course, I'm not trying to say we should finish up these negotiations and please go home since the game is ending. I never wanted to negotiate with the magical kingdom in the first place. It'd be best if they would just change the system, but I know how many years it takes for them just to change one regulation."
The girl snapped her fingers again. The green liquid inside her cup turned black, bubbling and fizzy. She lifted the cup to her lips.
"I prefer this, after all,"
she said, face relaxing into a smile.
I don't plan to sit back and wait for that. I don't want things to take forever, and there's no way I'm gonna stand for bad magical girls running loose in the meantime. So I'm not gonna negotiate with the magical kingdom. I'm gonna ignore them and do what I want.
The girl raised her hand up to eye level. Dust gathered into a spiral at her fingertip and became shining particles that merged into a 9x9 cube puzzle with all white squares. The cube floated on the girl's fingertip, changing without being touched, and on one side appeared an entirely empty square.
This empty square is the game world, about to decide the victor.
The girl grinned, and the expression made her glasses slide down. She supported them with her pointer finger.
Do you get what I'm trying to say? Inside this little tiny square space, I made a world and reproduced their data in there. I'm saying that's what I'm capable of.
Snow White listened to her without giving a response. The girl continued.
Cranberry's little mascot left logs of her final exam. I hacked those logs from the magical kingdom. I have all the data of the magical girls who participated on hand.
Snow White twitched just very slightly.
You get what I mean? I can reproduce La Pucelle, Hardcore Alice, and all the others inside my game. They'd be just as they were when they were alive, inherit all their old memories perfectly, like the originals. And I don't really know for sure, but I bet they'd probably have souls too. I'd make them just for you, Snow White. And the storage space and tech requirements be damned.
The girl stood from her chair, put her hands on the desk, and leaned her face in close toward Snow White. There was less than 4 inches between them. The breath from the girl's nose stirred Snow White's bangs.
I wanted to negotiate with you, Snow White. Let's join forces. Let's change the world together. Let's create a world where righteous magical girls can live with pride. Get a drink.
Chapter 11, and etc. Shadowgale. Shadowgale and Flea had moved over to the shop in the Evil King's castle area, and they were sticking firm to their spot. Shadowgale was modifying a stun gun with her wrench and scissors, while Flea was watching from her carpet. Shadowgale didn't think Flea understood what was being done. Knowledge and skills wouldn't help you comprehend the principles behind magic-based modification. Flea had to be pretending to watch Shadowgale work while her mind was actually on something else. The message from Flea came immediately after Shadowgale had discovered Noko. I forgot who's saying this message, so I'm just going to read it without voicing the character. Meet up with me at the Evil King's castle. Hurry. Until we see each other, no further contact needed. The message was brief. I think it would actually be a spoiler if we knew who said that and who voiced the character. When Flea sent brief messages. Oh, that was Flea. Sorry. Let's try that again. Right, it said the message from Flea. I don't know why I ignored that part.
Meet up with me at the Evil King's castle. Hurry. Until we see each other, no further contact needed.
Friends with Meadow. I am also a magical girl. I am dead now, Blay.
I don't know why it completely ignored the ah. I thought it would at least do like a quick but no. And then it pronounced blah as blay. The message was brief. When Flea sent brief messages, it meant they had to hurry. Shadowgale retrieved Noko's magical phone, but she was forced to leave her charred remains on the spot. She merely pressed her hands together before she left. She never did find out who had killed Noko. Meow. Was it Scooper? Sounded like he was confessing over there. Hey, Scooper? Scooper? Did you kill Noko? He looks at me. Did you do it? Why'd you do that? Scoopy. Scoopy killer confirmed? There is a really good, interesting plot twist that I do remember that I won't spoil, though. Where did I go? Oh, all that remained was with her was the feeling that she had failed to protect her. It took all her strength to carry her heavy legs to the evil king's castle, and before long she was joined by Flea. Shadowgale reported Noko's death in a tight, strained voice. On her magic carpet, Flea asked, "Really?" To which Shadowgale emphasized that there was no mistaking it. Flea received that with an "oh," and didn't reveal her thoughts on the matter. Once they arrived at the shop terrace in the Evil King's castle, Flea finally began sharing what she had witnessed. Flea had been going after Clantail and the others, following the trail of a chase and a fight. She passed the rubble of a building, a massive crater, and then a big hole in the ground. Immediately, Clantail had emerged from it. Flea had hidden in the shadow of a high rise to watch her. Clantail's lower body had been transformed into a gecko, the same one as during the Great Dragon fight, most likely in order to climb up out of the hole. Petchka had been under her right arm, Lazaline her left, and she had had a severed head tied to her waist. It was an extremely gruesome sight. Flea said that Clantail had been completely soaked, dripping water on the ground. Trying to find out who's saying this next line. I think it's Clantail. I was ways away, but neither Petchka nor Lazaline seemed to be alive. They were both wounded and hadn't been healed. As for the severed head, I couldn't see the face from my position. But judging from the hair color and style, as well as the general circumstances, I'm almost certain it was Melville. Oh wait, no, Flea was saying that. I thought it sounded more like a Flea thing. The way it was, the way that was worded. I don't know why, but that was really just made me think of someone reading the story and it's just like, really? That's what you want them to ask? Let's try that line again. I was a ways away, but neither Petchka nor Lazaline seemed to be alive. They were both wounded and hadn't been healed. As for the severed head, I couldn't see the face from my position, but judging from the hair color and style, as well as the general circumstances, I'm almost certain it was Melville. In other words, Clantail, Lazaline, and Petchka had most likely clashed with Melville, and only Clantail had survived in the end, Flea concluded. Clantail had then turned her lower body into a horse and begun trudging toward town, as you do. Flea had rushed toward the Evil King's castle, she said, taking care to avoid Clantail's notice. I believe she was headed to the wasteland town to bury their bodies. Now then, next. Having finished sharing her information with Shadowgale, Flea pulled out her magical phone and pressed the help button. The wind blowing through the terrace teased her and fluttered the edges of her magic carpet. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary about it, and yet something was strange. A black and white hologram appeared above the screen.
What do you need, Pum?
Flea asked. Can I take it that the goal of this game has been to gather and punish the magical girls who passed Cranberry's exams? The directness of her statement gave Fall pause for about 2 seconds.
No, Pone.
Then,
If the purpose of gathering the
okay, yeah, that is Fall.
If the purpose of gathering the magical girls who passed Cranberry's exams was punishing them, there would be a number of easier ways to do it, Pone. The point of this game was to get them together and test to see if they were really worthy of continuing as magical girls. Or that's what it was supposed to be, Pone.
I see. Then what about Lazaline? Even after our memories were restored, she said she never heard of the musician of the forest, Cranberry.
Huh? Hold on. What do you mean, Pone?
Fall had no facial expressions, and scattering scales was the only means the hologram had of conveying feeling. But the mascot's voice had gone shrill.
Lazaline didn't know the musician of the forest, Cranberry, Pone?
Listen, Fall. Though I'm sure it's unlikely, just in case, could you check with the master for me? Flea was the only one there who was calm. With a hand in her hair, she twirled the ends around her fingers, brought the curls in front of her eye patch, and held them to the sunlight. Could she see what she was doing? You didn't bring Lazaline in because you mistook the current one for the old one, did you? Flea spread her fingers again to release her hair, and her curl dropped back down. Someone familiar with the faces of the participants in question had been made the selection. I'm sure no errors would have been made. However, if an outsider who didn't participate in the exam selected participants simply based on documents that she'd intercepted, I'm sure she would make mistakes of this nature. Shadowgale was surprised. Lazaline hadn't had any connection to Cranberry. This was new information. Had Flea figured this out based on the fact that Lazaline was the second magical girl by that name, and the fact that she didn't know of Cranberry? Personally, Flea continued, I do see myself as a victim, though. If the families of the magical girls who died in my exam came and said to me, "You monster, don't play the victim," then I'd be unable to refute them, and I can understand the concerns about those like us passing Cranberry's exams and joining the ranks. As an involved party, I'd want to deny such concerns, but objectively speaking, I couldn't really argue. However, how could you bring in an innocent magical girl with no connection whatsoever to those murderous exams? If you tell me that's acceptable, then any justice this game might claim to have is false. Palms up, Flea faced Fall. This is cruel, isn't it? What did Lazaline do? There was no reason to force her to participate in this game, and of course no reason for her to die either. The volume of scales sparkling off Fall's body increased. Flea's tone was increasingly intense. Is there any point in this game if it lacks justice? No, there is not. Tell that to the master. Tell them to put a swift end to this and release us. Fall froze. The scattered scales faded and disappeared.
This is a notice from the master, Plume. It has been acknowledged that what had happened with Lapis Lazaline was an accident, Plume.
How wonderful that she's so gracious about it.
But having said that, even the master cannot stop a game in progress, Plume. The program will not end unless you fulfill the designated completion requirement, Plume.
That's not very convincing. Flea was talking, but Shadowgale was not even trying to follow her meaning. She was just watching. The rationale for this game has already collapsed. Whether it will be stopped or not is not something for you to decide. Fall didn't reply, and Flea continued. You dragged in Lazaline, an entirely blameless magical girl, but now you say standard operating procedures prevent you from putting a halt to the game? How very bureaucratic. We're being forced into participating in a game that should have ended long ago. Flea's voice echoed in Shadowgale's skull. I think that's supposed to say Flea's voice echoed, but it says Flea's voiced echoed. She wanted to hold her head and keel over. Flea was trying to use Lazaline as a bargaining chip. When Lazaline had first said she didn't know Cranberry, Flea must have become aware of her position in the game. If Flea had used Fall to tell the Master what she was explaining now, then maybe Lazaline wouldn't have had to die. But even knowing that she did, Flea hadn't done anything. Something was swirling around inside Shadowgale's chest. It was black, the color that resulted from mixing the others together. It was muddied. Even Shadowgale couldn't see through it.
I demand,
Flea began. Shadowgale looked at Flea's back. Her long hair hid most of it. Occasionally a gust of wind swayed her curls, giving Shadowgale just a glimpse. Her back was not large at all, but she was poised. Her back conveyed her belief that she was in the right.
That you put an end to this game right now. That's not an option for the Master anymore, Poon. If the Evil King is eliminated, the game will end that instant, Poon. Please defeat the Evil King quickly.
Flea turned off her phone, and Fall disappeared. That final exchange had made Shadowgale's face twist. One shallow remark pierced deep into her with terrible violence.
If the Evil King is eliminated, the game will end that instant.
Hold on, please, said Shadowgale. That can't be right. If the Evil King goes away, the game ends immediately. And the Evil King was one of the magical girls here. The one obstructing the game. She was killing a lot of people, right? And you said Melville's head was cut off, didn't you, miss? So then why isn't the game over? Shadowgale sensed that for the first time in a very long time, she had been able to snap back at Flea. It might have been nothing more than a puppy's soft nip, but it was probably the first time she had argued with her since they'd gotten their memories back. Even as Shadowgale recognized the hints of unease lurking in Flea's words, she was glad that she'd been able to argue. Melville did everything, right? Melville was the Evil King?
I did think that Melville was the Evil King,
Flea replied. I mean, she was, right? You said so, didn't you?
I believed that assassinating the other players was something only the Evil King would do.
Nobody but the Evil King would have done that, Shadowgale said.
This means that while she was the most likely candidate, she was in fact not the Evil King. Or she was not, in fact, the Evil King. If she were, then the game would already be over. So therefore, she was not the Evil King, but just a player who went around killing the others. I can only speculate as to her motives for such violence, but judging from her costume, I can imagine. Essentially, she wanted a killing match.
There is no way.
I won't entirely discard the possibility that Melville is the Evil King. She may have used her magic to camouflage herself to make Clantail believe she'd cut off her head. But that wouldn't explain why Noko was burned to death.
She had left their ranks without a word, and then someone had burned her to cinders. The murder weapon was probably the flamethrower sold in the Evil King's castle. No, no other weapon could kill someone like that.
What we need to do, said Flea, is prepare ourselves for anyone to be the Evil King.
What if we get killed before we're ready?
I've already taken care of that.
Flea turned on her magical phone.
Those doll remains, and the tiny girl who looked like Rionetta, that was most likely Rionetta's real body. Do you recall that there was a magical phone line beside where she fell? When I checked it, I found multiple travel passes inside. If the owner of that phone was the one managing non-combat items, we can assume it was Petchka's. Though if it was Rionetta's, that would be fine too. I took the travel passes from that phone, as well as the number of travel passes in circulation since we arrived at the Evil King's castle. The only passes in circulation are the ones you and I possess.
What about clan tales?
Passes are shared among a party, since they're used on the party unit. Rionetta or Pechka must have been managing them all.
And what about Noko and Lazaline?
Shadowgale asked. I've been managing all our party's passes.
And Melville?
Judging from the number of passes in circulation right now and the number of passes we hold, she has 0. Being that all that's left of Melville is a severed head, her body must have been horribly damaged in battle, and her magical phone destroyed along with it.
Flea summoned up their item list and showed it to Shadowgale. The number for the travel passes was on display. An unbelievable 10,000. The maximum number for the travel passes was 10,000, and the number of passes in circulation was also 10,000, so no more could be purchased. Flea grinned boldly.
I bought them all. The passes lose effect a day after use, but they're not depleted if they're never used. Now, no one but us can travel between areas.
Get a drink. It would have required an incredible amount of magical candy in order to monopolize the travel passes. There was no way you could gather that much by diligently hunting monsters and finishing quests. Shadowgale had been the one to gather that candy. The amount used to buy up all those passes was only a fraction of Shadowgale's earnings. She had gathered that much candy through her grinding efforts. When Masked Wonder's miracle coin had been stolen, Fall had told them that if an event item goes out of circulation, the event will recur. Flea had zeroed in on that rule. By selling the dragon shield, when through defeating the great dragon, they had revived the dragon to defeat it again. You could easily make a fortune in magical candy by repeating this over and over. Fighting the normal way, they would never have been able to defeat the great dragon with just the 2 of them, but there was a way to get around that. Flea had most likely realized it before they'd even fought the dragon. Right in the middle of the fight, Shadowgale had looked at Melville attacking the dragon from outside the red line and figured it out. If you attacked from outside the red line, you could defeat it safely without ever giving it a chance. But neither Flea nor Shadowgale had any weapons or abilities that would enable them to attack from a distance like Clantail's spears, Melville's javelins, Daisy's beam, the Samurai Girl's slash, or Lazline's teleportation. Flea's high-powered wheelchair with its built-in killer laser had already been destroyed. Flea had ordered Shadowgale to modify the toy bow and arrow they'd acquired through R, and she had made it into a large, mounting-style firing device. Its ammunition was the Dragon Killer dagger. As long as it hit, it could kill any dragon in one strike, no matter how massive the beast. If she missed, she had to return the Dragon Killer to her magical phone by canceling the item summon. Flea had spent some of the magical candy they'd stored up via this method to buy up all of R. With R, the rarer the item, the lower the drop rate, but even the most common item, the map, had a circulation limit. Once the total stock of maps hit the maximum, you would no longer receive a map from a pull. By sheer force of wealth, they had acquired all the R items with their massive abundance of candy. The items acquired through R were mostly just mundane objects, and not the sort that would meet Flea's standards. So she zeroed in on something else. Even mundane items could become weapons if Shadowgale modified them, like the toy bow and arrow she had transformed into the large firing device. Flea tossed a plethora of these mundane items out of her magical phone, telling Shadowgale to go on and modify them. This is too much, said Shadowgale.
We're going to do it anyway. We don't have that much time left.
We do have time, don't we? I mean, no one can travel now, right?
Only for the next 2 days. Then there will be the pre-maintenance period event.
Shadowgale gasped. For the pre-maintenance event, all the surviving magical girls would be forcibly summoned to the square. Whether or not they had the travel passes, they would be forced to come face to face.
We're both the non-combat magical girls. If the evil king is a fighting magical girl, we'll be unable to strike back and we'll die. But if we can equip ourselves now, we'll have a chance at victory. Meow. With your skills, it must work out somehow. First, let's finish this job.
For the next 2 days, Shadowgale poured all her effort into creating weapons. She wouldn't call it being worked like a slave, because Flea was helping her out and following her directions. She managed to create a number of weapons, not because she'd gotten a helper, but because she was pushed by necessity and pressed for time. She managed this feat in spite of her client tormenting her with the unreasonable demand that she should have an easier time of this compared to the 10-legged tank. Most of these weapons were based on the stun gun. The 2 mini-boss enemies in the Evil King's castle, the knight and the robot, had filled out the end of the monster encyclopedia. There were no evil-type monsters anywhere, but for some reason, the shop sold a stun gun and a flamethrower, which were especially effective against evil-type monsters.
At the very end of the game, you get to the shop in the Evil King's castle, and it's selling useless joke items. It's difficult to believe, but if you took these items at face value, you should first consider the kind of enemies a weapon such as a stun gun would be used against. Yes, it's for use on humans. So if the description says this weapon is especially effective against evil-type enemies, that must mean an evil-type enemy could only be one of us magical girls. Flea stated her thoughts and proposed that Shadowgale should base most of the weapons on the stun gun and flamethrower. The stun gun was a self-defense weapon used to incapacitate opponents, while the flamethrower could only be used for killing. If Shadowgale had to pick one, she had fewer emotional qualms about using the stun gun. Indeed, Momori. But since I last confirmed the number in circulation...
Oh wait, was Shadowgale saying the last line? Oh well.
Indeed, Momori. But since I last confirmed the number in circulation, someone else has already bought another flamethrower. The enemy might not necessarily be as kind as you, Momori, so keep that in mind.
In the end, Shadowgale used a flamethrower too, as they worked on their project. As Shadowgale gave Flea instructions and listened to Flea's request, no unpleasant thoughts floated up in her mind, and she was able to converse naturally with her partner. Maybe they were just so immersed in the work, she didn't have the time to worry about anything else. Oh no, Scoopy! Scoopy! It was the 3rd day since their last login, the day of the pre-maintenance event. Both Shadowgale and Flea were on the Evil King's castle terrace, quietly waiting for the time to come. Flea was on her magic carpet, and so was Shadowgale, not sitting but kneeling and ready to jump off and go at any time. Flea was sitting, as per usual. The 2 of them were still and silent as the time passed. All that came into the shop in the Evil King's castle was the occasional breeze blowing through. The scissors and wrench hanging from Shadowgale's belt rattled and swayed, creating the only sounds. The only thing changing was her mounting anxiety. Their magical phones broke the silence with message alert noise. Abruptly, their surroundings went dark. An event is now beginning. Players, please gather in the square in the Wasteland Town. They were transferred from the Evil King's castle with its stark whiteness and wafting sweet scent to the Wasteland Town square, with its plain palette of gray, ochre, brown, and khaki. The transfer was sudden and casual. Before Shadowgale knew it, she was somewhere else. No nausea or rattling of her brain. The Wasteland Town Plaza was a plaza in name only. Meow. It was hushed and desolate. No, that's not right. Shadowgale mentally corrected herself. During the very first event, she would have found all the magical girls gathered together to be a magnificent sight. It would be more accurate to say that the place seemed desolate during events now that their numbers had diminished. Back during the first event, there had been 15 people, and now there were only 3. 3 people. Flea, Shadowgale, and one more. It was Scooper. Right, buddy? Was it you? Was it you? Yeah? Hushed and desolate, except for Scoopy doing a meow. Yeah. Oh, I'm petting him. I have to pet him to keep him from turning off the computer. Maybe I'll actually pick him up if he'll let me. Scoopy. Scoopy. He keeps inching backwards. Scoopy. Scoopy. You don't want me to pick you up? Oh, okay. Where did I go? Oh, Shadowgale looked around. The square was surrounded by buildings. With 15 girls here, it had felt small. With 3, it was huge. There was no cover, just a broken-down fountain with a mermaid statue decorating it. The fountain was dry, and instead of water, a thin layer of sandy buildup was inside. Everything about this place was just as it had been the last time. No matter how many times they came here, it was the same. Shadowgale looked around once more. There was no sign of anyone but the 3 of them. She looked at the locator device in her hand. She turned a thermometer they had acquired through R into a super thermometer, with the added functionality of the map application that told them their party members' locations. Flea had teased her about the name she'd given it, calling it tasteless, but its functionality was no joke. It was a fantastic item that could be used to detect the surface temperature of objects and display them on the screen. Flea had made it her build in a hurry, saying that if worse came to worse, and Melville was still alive, they would be in real trouble without it. According to the super thermometer, there were only 3 magical girls in the square. There's no one else. She tried saying it out loud. Nobody replied. Flea looked around cautiously and activated her magical phone. It lit up, sparkled, and a holographic image appeared.
Now then, about the event this time. The Miracle Coin Contest will recur... Hold on,
Flea said to Fall.
What is it, Plum?
I've asked this before, but I want to confirm this with you one more time. There's no way to avoid the forced transportation to the pre-maintenance period event, correct?
No, Plum. The players are forcibly summoned for the pre-maintenance period event, and all magical girls in the game, no matter who, will be gathered in the plaza, Plum. If they don't reach it in time, they will be forcibly teleported, Plum.
Flea turned her head 90 degrees to the side and then faced forward again. It seemed she was scanning the area.
By the way, what are you doing, Plum?
Asked Fall. Shadowgale was on Flea's magic carpet too, just in case the Evil King, who had been stuck in the wasteland area, had set traps in the square in preparation for the pre-maintenance period event, while Flea and Shadowgale had been arming themselves. Shadowgale was probably the only one of all the magical girls who would have been able to make explosive or electrical mechanical traps, but anyone could dig a pit. But it seemed Fall's question was not just about that, but also about their weapons. It was judging them for the arsenal Shadowgale had procured.
Hey, hold on. Why has it come to this, Poon? Obviously, the stun gun was being sold in the Evil King's castle with the intention of making the magical girls fight one another in the final stages, Poon. And the master who came up with the nasty idea of including a flamethrower, so you all wouldn't object to using the stun gun instead, Poon. Why would you use something like that? It's just what the master wants, Poon.
None of your business. Shut your trap. Shadowgale dropped her magical phone on the ground and stepped on it with her toe to turn it off. Fall's words were rumbling like an earthquake in her chest, and she felt like the pain would rip her apart. She didn't want to hear this. "I'd like to ask one thing," said Flea. Yes, what Shadowgale wanted to know was something else. Oh no, if they are holding a shit from a shop, they can steal it via teleporting away. That's true. Are you the evil king? She asked the magical girl standing on the opposite side of the fountain. Today she was a horse. Under the rays of the sun pouring into the square, Shadowgale could see her robust musculature and beautiful coat, even at this distance. Her human upper body held a spear in its right hand, while in her left she held a shield at the ready, her horse's tail swiped up to smack her rear. No. Clantail's reply was short and brief. She shot back an equally short, brief question. What happened to Noko? She was killed, said Flea. What happened to Petchka, Lazaline, and Melville? Melville killed Petchka and Lazaline. Clantail looked down as if in pain. And I killed Melville. She raised her head sharply and glared at Flea. Flea was calm. You killed Melville? That's impressive. Clantail didn't reply. Flea continued, her tone casual. Fall told me that if the Evil King dies, the game will end immediately. I've heard the same thing. Shadowgale recalled how Flea had tried to use Lazaline as a bargaining chip, and pain pricked deep in her heart. Everything she'd forgotten for the 2 days she'd been working on those weapons in the Evil King's castle came back to her. I killed Melville, so why isn't the game over? Clantail cried out in frustration. In a voice that was calm but resonant, Flea replied, It must be that Melville was not the Evil King. Then it's one of you two. Neither of us is the Evil King. In other words, Clantail, you have to be the Evil King. The argument across the fountain and the 50-foot wide gap between them stopped for a moment. Clantail raised a leg and stamped the ground with a hoof. The kick was hard enough to shake the whole square and leave a deep impression on the ground. I'm not the Evil King. That's just what the Evil King would say, Flea countered. Melville is a zombie. You can't kill them that easy. We'll see. I don't want to spoil it. Why were all the travel passes sold out? I couldn't buy any. Because I bought them all. We couldn't have the Evil King coming into our area. How did you get so much candy? You'd need 50,000 to buy up all the travel passes. Our plentiful stores of candy are a result of legitimate in-game efforts. Because you're the Evil King? That hardly warrants an accusation. Clantail jumped, her horse legs bent to build power, and then she leaped. A kick off her hoof, and the head of the mermaid statue adorning the fountain was shooting toward them. Shadowgale blocked the head with the dragon shield, but Clantail was already looming in front of them. Shadowgale and Flea split to the left and right. As she jumped to the side, Shadowgale swung at Clantail with her wrench in an attempt to hold her back, but Clantail smacked upward with her shield and knocked it away behind Shadowgale. Shadowgale's hand tingled. When Clantail followed her shield blow with a hoof, Shadowgale somehow managed to block it with her own dragon shield. Even though her equipment was +12, the impact lifted her off the ground. Fortunately, her shield hand was not numbed. From behind Clantail, Flea thrust out a stun gun weapon. This one had been modified using a bamboo stick. It had far greater reach than the original stun gun, and it was flexible too. Clantail slipped past the difficult-to-avoid attack by transforming her lower body into a snake and whipping her tail to hit Flea behind her. Flea blocked the tail strike with her shield, but couldn't absorb the full impact. She fell from her carpet and tumbled along the ground. The difference in skill between combat and non-combat magical girls, as Flea had put it, was clear to them. Even in a 2-on-1 fight, Clantail was insanely strong. Clantail's lower body transformed into a yellowish-brown creature with a tawny pattern and long legs, so long that she blocked out the sun. A giraffe. She raised up her sphere. Shadowgale was about to use her shield to block, but then a shiver of fear ran up her spine. The tip of Clantail's spear rose up, sparkling, reflecting the sunlight from high in the heavens. Shadowgale looked up, tossed away her shield on the hunch that this wasn't going to work, and jumped to the side. Clantail's spear swung down, and as it did, she transformed from a giraffe into a tiger to increase the speed and power of her strike. Her spear sliced deep into the earth, making the ground shake. Even though it had to be just a weapon +7, with Clantail swinging it, even Shadowgale's shield +12 couldn't block it entirely. The wall that was the difference between their combat capabilities loomed grimly over Shadowgale. Clantail then spun around to slash her spear horizontally at Flea, who had climbed onto her magic carpet again and was pressing in on Clantail from behind. Flea lowered the height of her carpet and flattened herself down to evade the strike. It sliced off some of her hair, and her golden curls floated away and scattered. For the first time, Clantail's back was to Shadowgale. Clantail's back was broad and respectable. It seemed reliable somehow, in a different manner from Flea's. Seeing her back, something inside Shadowgale's heart whispered, could a back that had shouldered the underhanded role of the Evil King be so dignified? Was Clantail really the Evil King? Shadowgale shook off the whispers and threw the net. This was an electromagnetic mesh that would cover a wide area. She'd made it by combining a rope from R with a stun gun. If she flung this at Clantail from behind, even she would have a hard time avoiding it. She caught her target in the net, and before Clantail had even a moment to struggle, she was electrocuted. The stun gun could knock out a magical girl in one zap. Clantail's knees hit the ground, and her head slumped. Shadowgale was letting her guard down, thinking the fight was over, when the butt of Clantail's spear came toward her. Clantail was thrusting back without looking behind, and the handle of her spear skimmed Shadowgale's arm. It wasn't a direct hit, but it split open the flesh of her right arm in a spurt of blood. An awful sound came from her bone. Shadowgale screamed and clutched her wounded arm. Clantail turned around. Clantail's eyes were burning with anger. On her chest, a necklace flashed. It was a charm sold at one of the shops, the Earth Charm. It conferred resistance to lightning elemental attacks. Shadowgale understood why the electrical net hadn't worked. Shadowgale would just have had to peek at the item encyclopedia to know that someone had bought a large number of stun guns. So all she had to do was equip herself with the accessory that would give her resistance to electricity. That was the Earth Charm Clantail was wearing. Faster than Clantail could swing down her spear, Flea attacked Clantail from behind, and Clantail turned around to block with her shield. They both went in to swing at each other and dodged their respective hits. Shadowgale's heart was still whispering, "Did you see Clantail's eyes just now? That wasn't anger. That wasn't just anger. There was sadness there, too. That wasn't the look of someone who fights knowing she's the Evil King." Shadowgale countered the voice inside her. There were only 3 people left, herself, Flea, and Clantail. The Evil King had to be Clantail. Even as she argued with herself, in her heart she was smoldering. It was suspicion. She couldn't rid herself of her misgivings, and she couldn't stop thinking about Cranberry's exam. It would be easy enough for Flea to deceive her, She would lure Shadowgale in, and the two of them would defeat Clantail together. Once that was done, Flea would finish Shadowgale off, now that her job was over, and Flea would be the last girl standing. Memory! Flea's yell snapped her back to reality. Clantail was pushing Flea back. Flea had pulled out the flamethrower, and it was gushing flames, but Clantail blocked with her shield and swiped them aside with her spear, deftly avoiding any direct hits. Shadowgale picked up her wrench and approached Clantail, but Clantail wouldn't have that, transforming into an alligator to whip her tail at Shadowgale and keep her at bay. But now her upper body was positioned lower to the ground. Flea hopped casually down from her carpet. For just a moment, Clantail froze. Flea hadn't stood up once, up until this point. She had either been riding her wheelchair or the magic carpet, or Shadowgale had been carrying her. Shadowgale knew Flea could walk normally. She just avoided revealing that to others as much as possible. And then, at times like these, she could catch people off guard by suddenly standing up. Now that Clantail had given her an opening, Flea took full advantage. Bounding off the ground, she grabbed Clantail's shield hand. Clantail jerked her shield from side to side to throw Clantail off, and flung her away together with the shield. Flea spun in the air and landed gently on all fours. A greasy sweat was breaking out on Clantail's forehead. Her left hand, the one that had been holding the shield, was now shaking. Her little and ring fingers were broken, pointing in the wrong directions. Flea had fought in the same way back then, too. She would pretend that she couldn't walk to deceive the weak, and when the time came, she would hop up and attack. Her opponents would be stunned, and Flea would injure them, just as she had done with Clantail. Yes, Cranberry's exam. It was just like back then. Something black was swirling around inside Shadowgale. It was hot, muddy, and slowly increasing in volume. Was the evil king really Clantail? Wasn't it Flea who was the evil king? Just now, Flea had judged based on the process of elimination that since neither Shadowgale nor Flea were the evil king, then it had to be Clantail. But how could Flea say for certain that Shadowgale wasn't the evil king? Maybe she had slipped and revealed her position as the evil king. If Flea herself were the evil king, she would know Shadowgale was not. That was self-explanatory. Flea blasted some more flames, and Clantail transformed into a leopard to nimbly evade them. Her dodge took her right to where the dragon shield lay, where Shadowgale had dropped it. Clantail swiftly scooped it up and held it with her intact pointer and middle fingers and thumb. This was part of their strategy, too. Before the battle had begun, Shadowgale had deliberately thrown away her magical phone. Doing this meant Shadowgale could no longer desummon items and return them to her magical phone, creating a situation where it was possible for her items to be stolen. And the dragon shield with its plus 12 modification was an item worth stealing. Flea pulled a remote control out of her sleeve and pressed it. Flames spewed out from the inside of the dragon shield. Clantail screamed voicelessly, throwing away the shield and writhing in pain. Her lower body transformed into a massive, translucent jellyfish, which wrapped around her flaming upper body. Shadowgale had heard before that a jellyfish's body was mostly made up of water. Clantail sizzled, and steam was rising from her body as she put out the flames, but she was still horribly burned. She curled up, moaning. Shadowgale had seen this exact same thing many times before during Cranberry's exam. Flea's plots, traps, and trickery had done in countless magical girls, leaving their bodies sprawled on the ground. Plus 12, that's a big number. It's true. And in this game, she had been the same. Flea had announced Masked Wonder's murder in the square and arranged for all the girls to face the great dragon at once, just to see their reactions, and in both cases, that had caused an outbreak of chaos. But even when people died, Flea had no regrets. Only Flea had known when Noko ran off. It was odd, and Shadowgale didn't even really know why she had died. Maybe Flea had been able to kill Noko? Most people wouldn't be able to, but Flea... Shadowgale picked up her wrench in her left hand and surged forward. The black, muddy stream in her heart was at a rolling boil, whirling around and around in circles. She had to do it. This was her only chance. The more the current rushed around, the faster it got, the hotter it got, the bigger it got, the muddier and blacker it got. Shadowgale charged toward Flea and swung the wrench at her face. Flea had been focused on Clantail's writhing, and she would never have dreamed that she would be attacked from the side. She didn't avoid or block the strike, and Shadowgale got a solid hit. She felt it connect. The sound, the sensation of breaking bones, all of it was telling her inside, her heart, that she had done it right. Flea soared away and landed on her back on the road that led from the square, rolling and sliding along the ground until she finally reached a stop. Shadowgale was watching Flea. She'd been watching her steadily, right up until the moment she'd swung that wrench into her face. If Flea was the evil king, then she would have to react somehow. She might be angry or upset, or she could be trying to deceive Shadowgale. Shadowgale had to get to the bottom of this. Come on, how will you react? You won't deceive me anymore. Flea lay face up on the ground. Her fingers twitched twice, then stopped. In Shadowgale's heart, the black torrent transformed into swirling exulsion. Shadowgale couldn't believe that Clantail was the evil king, and she didn't understand how Flea could have trusted Shadowgale so blindly. Every single thing she had done had been suspicious. Her claim that she would make judgments based on character had just been an excuse for her to ignore Melville, hadn't it? After all, the evil king would be glad to have such a capable individual going around killing off the others on her own. Shadowgale looked at her left hand, gripping the wrench. It was trembling. She looked at Flea. She wasn't even twitching now. Chills shot down Shadowgale's spine. It couldn't be, with one hit. What am I doing? I've killed Flea? Killed her? Why? Why would I? She recalled her parents saying that they'd named her Momori so that she would protect her young mistress. Her knees weakened. She couldn't stand. She'd killed Conaway. She'd killed Conaway. But it wasn't over. The game wasn't over yet. Strength drained from her legs. Shadowgale was on her way to the ground when something came up from behind to support her. It was a hand grabbing her collar to lift her up. You're the evil king, huh? It was Clantail. She still had some burns, but the majority of them had healed. Her left hand, the one holding Shadowgale, didn't seem to be wounded either. She'd clearly used a recovery medicine. The evil king? Shadowgale wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come out. It wasn't that she was scared of Clantail. She was terrified of herself for having been so driven by her suspicions that she had struck Flea down. Tears began to spill out from her eyes, as if they'd burst through a dam. Clantail's right hand adjusted its grip on her spear. Lazaline and Petchka saved me. I can't die. That meant, I can't die. I'm sorry, but I'm going to kill you. Clantail was announcing that she would end Shadowgale's life. Flea was dead, and only Clantail and Shadowgale were left, so the evil king had to be Clantail now. The wrench slipped from Shadowgale's hand. Her hand felt weak. The weapon felt disgusting to her. She could still feel the sensation of Flea's skull breaking. Everything rapidly faded inside her. She didn't care anymore what happened. The wrench was the evil king. I've got it! A very familiar voice called out, and Shadowgale winced in shock. Clantail was stunned too. Both of them looked over to the road where Flea had landed to see the owner of the voice pushing her upper body off the ground. I get it. I've figured it out. What frightening magic. Flea sat up entirely, observing Shadowgale and Clantail. Flea's nose had been severely crushed, and her face was soaked in blood. Her face, which was especially beautiful, even for a magical girl, was entirely ruined, but there was still light in her eyes. Perhaps the strength in them overwhelmed Clantail as she retreated half a step.
When I considered who might be the evil king, Flea said, I excluded the possibility that it was you, Momori. I was confident about that judgment, but not entirely certain. I figured I wouldn't really mind if you were the evil king. Even if it was you, things would work out as long as I conducted myself in such a way as to put you at an advantage. It didn't matter to me if you were the evil king or a player. As long as you survived, that was enough for me. If you were the evil king, I would have cooperated with you in killing the other players. Clantail let go of Shadowgale, who hit the ground on her bottom and moaned in pain. With no apparent concern, Flea continued, But then something strange happened. At some point, I came to think that perhaps I shouldn't be trusting you, Momori. Before then, I'd been willing to go along with anything as long as you were with me. So what kind of strange situation would make me feel I couldn't trust you anymore? Although I found this baffling, I continued to be suspicious of you. Until just now, when you knocked me down. You hit me, I flew back, I rolled along the ground, and then all the doubts building in my heart faded away.
Shadowgale put her hands on the ground and inched back farther. She didn't understand what Flea was saying. She couldn't understand. But she couldn't stop crying regardless. Slowly, Flea stood.
It's strange, isn't it? I was suspicious of you to begin with, and then when you hit me hard enough to knock me away, you'd expect that to convince me that you were the enemy, but that blow dispelled my misgivings. Clearly, there was something wrong with my head. What had caused this? As I looked up at the sky, I thought about it. Now that the strange suspicion was gone, I could think again. Yes, it was the square. My suspicion went away because I was out of the plaza.
Flea stepped from the road into the square.
It's just as I thought. When I enter this area, my heart clouds. I feel suspicious and my mind becomes dull. Something is preventing me from questioning the situation. It's making me avert my eyes from things that I normally would have considered. And these effects aren't just limited to myself. It's affecting everyone in this place. Momori, trust Clantail. She's not the evil king.
The square is the evil king. Once more, Shadowgale heard whispering in her heart. Don't listen to what she's saying. She's a master of trickery. If you listen to her, you'll lose.
Momori, don't get distracted!
Blood was pouring and gushing from Flea's crushed nose like a waterfall, but her voice still carried from the road into the square, striking into Shadowgale's chest too. The whispers scattered and dispersed, and the black torrent instantly evaporated.
Both of you, come over here! And under no condition do you let your guard down.
Flea stood in front of the fountain. She and Shadowgale looked at each other and then nodded together. Shadowgale raised the dragon shield and stun gun, while Clantail transformed her lower body into a tiger. Both of them headed toward either side of the fountain.
There's sand piled up here, said Flea. We're going to clear it all away. Be ready. You could be attacked at any moment.
They obeyed her. All three of them scooped the sand out from the fountain until it was empty.
Here, look. Do you see anything odd here?
Flea asked. They had exposed the bottom of the fountain. And indeed, there was an unnatural crack there, a circular fissure about 3 feet in diameter.
Break it open.
They're going to use pocket sand, the strongest attack. Clantail raised her front legs and swung them down. Since the middle was already cracked, the bottom of the fountain split easily. and fragments of stone fell away. There was a space underneath. Shadow Gale slowly leaned over, peering into the space. Under the fountain was a hole about 7 feet squared, and inside it was a girl in a maid outfit holding her right wrist, trembling. Noko. In this game, you will take on the role of the evil king. Oh, I guess I can delete this. That was what was written in the message sent to Noko's magical phone. Her win condition was the death of all other players. If you watched the entire chain of incidents Cranberry had caused from above, Noko would have clearly been classified as an aggressor, not a victim. She had once been a member of a group of magical girls whose leader had been a Cranberry sympathizer. Noko had received compensation many times in exchange for cooperating with exams. Her role had been to induce action in the more reluctant magical girls. She would approach the participants, pretending to be a normal person, and transmit anger, hatred, and other feelings to them to speed up the exam. She hadn't been in a position to know everything about the exams, but still, she'd had a general grasp on what she was doing. While she'd known it wasn't a good thing, she'd continued to cooperate because she wanted the money. Ever since Noko's father had vanished, her family had needed money. Normally, you couldn't make any money being a magical girl, so she had no choice but to earn it through abnormal means. When Noko's group leader had been exposed as Cranberry's co-conspirator, she'd been brought to justice, and Noko had lost her source of income. But the authorities of the magical kingdom had not touched Noko. Her leader might have covered for her. Though she'd felt bad, she had been relieved. But the master of the Magical Girl Raising Project knew what Noko had done. The master had come to her, telling her that either they would expose everything or she could participate in this game. She had to pick one. Noko's old leader was still missing, and Noko couldn't go off and leave her mother. She didn't have any options. But when the time came to actually start the game, Noko joined the others in playing it. All the others had gotten themselves worked up about how they could end the game if they had just defeated the evil king, but Noko hadn't been given that information. Her win condition was different from that of all the others. The game progressed, and she never told anyone who she was. When she had found out that death in the game meant death in the real world, she'd sunk into a deep despair. Would these forced games of kill or be killed never end? Noko thought about just confessing instead. If she alone were to die, then all the others would be saved. But she couldn't do it. Her mother's face rose in her mind, and while she was busy waffling, the other magical girls were dying. Not in accidents like Magical Daisy. Someone was killing them. A number of the magical girls participating in this game were those Noko had seen during Cranberry's exams. Noko had more information than the others, so slowly she came to understand what the master was trying to do. Those who had been involved with Cranberry were being checked to see if they were the right material. Noko, who had been a part of Cranberry's plots, was being given one last chance. She had no choice but to take that chance and run with it. Whenever she had the chance to encounter other magical girls during events and such, Noko spread the seeds of discord. She encouraged the conflict between Rionetta and Nonoko. She urged on Melville, made Petchka more frightened, and made Shadow Gale suspicious of Flea. But she conducted herself with the utmost caution so that she would never become the target of their hatred and anger. Even with their memories gone, the magical girls who had gone through the exams still had darkness and wounds in their hearts. Noko's magic worked well on people like that. When Noko had heard that Melville's crimes had been exposed, she'd figured that as the evil king, she could end this soon without doing a thing. Using Aunt Meow Meow's body and a flamethrower, she had faked her own death. She burned up the corpse while intoning,
I'm sorry,
like a spell, and then cut off her own hand, sobbing with pain and shock, and incinerated that too. After that, she had just waited until the pre-maintenance period event. She'd used the shovel to make a space under the fountain to hide, and then transmitted feelings to the magical girls who gathered there. She turned their attention away from her so that they wouldn't notice her hiding spot, while she spread negative feelings of suspicion, hate, and anger. She would induce them to kill one another, and in the survivor, she would induce a deep, deep despair to make her kill herself. In order to be the last one, Noko had no other choice. But now she'd failed, and she'd ruined her last chance. The 3 magical girls outside the hole were looking down at Noko. The 3 magical girls were standing with the sun at their backs. Noko couldn't detect in their expressions any sense of superiority as the victors or joy at having finished the game. As they gazed down at Noko, Shadowgale, Clantail, and even Flea seemed somehow sad. No, not yet. There was still one more thing she could do. She had one chance left. Hand shaking, Noko brought out a magical phone and threw it away. She'd abandoned her own magical phone, so the one she was using was at Meow Meow's. She'd acquired it from digging up her grave. She took the shovel in her left hand. The shovel's sharp tip had helped her dig many holes, and it had also helped her with splitting open the bottom of the fountain. This shovel, the one that Clantail had given her, had not chipped once, right to the end. Noko smiled at the trio. She couldn't stop herself from shaking no matter what, but still, she tried to give them a brave smile.
I'm not going to resist, but will you make a deal with me?
Master side number 11. One block of the cube changed color. The game was over. As if she'd been waiting for that, Snow White opened her mouth. Tell me one thing. That's the one thing. It was the first time she'd spoken since entering that room. That proposal definitely moved her heart. The girl chuckled. I heard that there was one magical girl who was unconnected to any of this.
Oh, that. Something Lazaline, was it? The real confusing one? I guess you could say she wasn't involved, and well, I won't deny that it was my mistake that inadvertently led to her participation, but she still received training from one of the children, you know. I guess we could call her semi-involved, eh? Well, she did do some pretty crazy fighting mid-game before she died, so I'd say no problem there.
She laughed. Snow White narrowed her eyes silently.
So anyway, who cares about that stuff? Join me, Snow White. Lots of Cranberry's children are still out there. Let's screen them, 2 of us together. You and me are sure to do a good job. We'll create a world that only has righteous magical girls. The girl leaned forward on the desk and took Snow White's hand. Snow White nodded silently, and the girl returned her nod with an enormous grin. I understand that Cranberry's children are dangerous, said Snow White. Yeah, right? I thought you'd understand.
The magical girls chosen by the killing exams are selfish and egotistical. When things don't go as they want, they try to solve things with violence. And in order to enact what they think is right, believe and oppose the magical kingdom's orders. And I'm that way too.
No way!
The girl sneezed. Sneezed. The girl squeezed Snow White's hand tighter.
You're different, Snow White. You didn't kill anyone, and you got Cranberry. Without you, she might still be holding her battle royales.
I didn't defeat Cranberry.
But it happened because you were there.
The girl was still grasping Snow White's hand, and she shook it up and down. Both of their hands hit the desk, rattling the saucers and cups. Snow White's eyes rose to examine the girl.
But other than Cranberry...
Oh, wait. I can't tell who's... I think that was Snow White saying that.
But other than Cranberry... There were examiners other than Cranberry holding killing exams. What about those children? Of course, they get the same treatment as Cranberry's children. The right kind of magical girl will be forgiven. I'll never allow the wrong kind of magical girl to pass. And if those children hold more battle royales? I'd definitely never let that go. I won't let any of those types call themselves magical girls. I'll get rid of them. I won't even need an exam to do that.
Snow White tried to pull her hand away from the girl's grasp, but the girl made no move to let go, so Snow White wrenched it away. My magic has changed quite a bit since I first acquired it.
Huh. So in other words, that means you've grown, huh?
It used to be that I could hear the thoughts of people in trouble. The fundamental nature of my magic still hasn't changed, but now I can hear deep psychology, reflexive thought, and even things a person is not aware they're thinking.
Oh yeah, I saw your fight with Flamey and I could kinda tell.
No one attacks while consciously thinking. I'm about to sweep her legs out from under her, so I sure hope she doesn't dodge. Snow White had attacked and defended as if she could read even Flamey's reflexive actions. But I can't read erased memories, said Snow White, which is why I looked into this myself. Do you remember your teacher's name?
Of course I remember. My master was a really amazing magical girl.
The girl raised her index finger and opened her mouth halfway as if she were about to say something, and then she stared into empty space. Dust danced in the air. She held that same pose for 30 seconds.
Huh?
Her master had been an outstanding and righteous magical girl, cool, cute, and eloquent. She taught her what it meant to be a heroine. Her master would risk her own life for justice and shed tears for strangers. The girl admired her, and even now, aspired to be like her. But in spite of that, she couldn't come up with her master's name. And not just her name, her face was vague in her mind too. She'd admired her master so much, so was it strange that they hadn't continued? So it was strange that they hadn't continued together. Wouldn't the natural choice be for her to try to team up with her master rather than Snow White? Why had it never occurred to her to join with her own teacher? The girl racked her brains, but the answers wouldn't come. She just couldn't think of her master's name. Snow White reached into the cloth pouch hanging from her belt and pulled out a stack of paper. It was about 200 sheets total on A4 size paper, held together with a bulldog lip. It looked like some sort of document. Oh! They're talking about a magical girl that's in Arc 3 right now. Your master was Pythie. She was influenced by Cranberry, and she had the examinees under her purview kill each other. She was the first magical girl I caught. The documents here, these documents I just collected, are a record of all the things she did.
Huh?
Pythie. It sounded familiar. The girl put her hands to her temples and held her head. It ached. She threw her head back. Her chair tipped over, and she hit the floor on her back. Her glasses fell off. The clatter of the chair leaning and hitting a monitor reverberated in the emptiness. You can do anything here, right? You can do anything here, just like a god, right? You should try digging up your memories. You'll be able to do that if you read these documents, I think. Her head hurt. Like it was being squeezed in a vice. Noise crawled into the walls of the room, the furniture, and the air.
The magical girls chosen by the killing exams are selfish and egotistical. When things don't go as they want, they try to solve things with violence. And in order to enact what they think is right, they'll even oppose the magical kingdom's orders. No, there was no way. She had to look at the documents then. She just had to use her almighty powers to investigate and see if there were any mistakes in her memory, any falsifications. Her head hurt. There was a pixel missing on the ceiling, and another on the floor. The missing pixels were spreading. She couldn't maintain the form of this world. Snow White stood, picked up the magical phone lying on the floor, and turned it on. Now then, I'll be asking you about the situation.
I'll tell you everything I know, Poon. But can I make one request, Poon?
What?
I'd really like it if you changed the settings for my sentence endings, Poon.
We can talk it over. The sound of Snow White's footsteps echoed through the floor into the girl's body. She heard the automatic doors opening, then closing. She had to call out to Snow White, but she couldn't make a sound. Gaps were beginning to appear in every part of this patchwork realm. The girl's soul screamed. The world was going into collapse. The ground at her feet crumbled away, and she fell into the abyss. She would never reach the bottom. Oh, wow. Snow White I was gonna say killed someone, but that's just infinite falling, I guess. Which might be worse.
I don't like saying poem after what I want to say, Poon.
She was the first magical girl ever. I'm not sure about that. It might go back farther. I have no idea. Epilogue. There were just the smallest hint of suspicion hidden in the insincere smile of the server who came to take their order. They were probably worried, possibly out of sheer kindness, or possibly out of the self-interested desire to avoid any problems in their workplace. But Mori could sympathize with concerns like that. Seeing these two side by side would give anyone cause for concern. It's gotten a bit colder lately. Despite having said that, the girl was in a short skirt and drinking iced tea through a straw. Conaway went to drink hot tea while she was out and about. Oh, what did Conaway say that, maybe? It's gotten quite a bit colder lately. Conaway went to drink hot tea when she was out and about, and her reasoning for that was incredibly obnoxious. The black tea they serve at restaurants is undrinkable, leaving me no choice but to mask the flavor with coldness. They were even, out in an open terrace. Conaway had insisted on this spot because it was sunny today, and she had taken a seat immediately without giving the other two the option of refusing. The other girl with them was silently sipping on a hot cocoa. Her silence was typical. Conaway stood out. Her clothing and accessories, their cost aside, were not really garish. Her makeup was strange and tasteful too, but her looks, from her luxurious curly hair to her flawless facial features, along with her haughty attitude, prevented Conaway from being lost in the crowd. Some might say she had an aura, but Mori thought she was just full of herself. The other girl with them was extremely plain. She was short, so short she could pass for an elementary school girl. Twin braids hung from either side of her head. Her glasses were unfashionable black plastic, and she wore no trace of makeup at all. Her skirt was probably school regulation length. Her plainness called to mind a bookish nerd or a class president. They were two entirely different types of girl, and you couldn't detect anything they might have in common. It suggested something suspicious was going on between them. Today, all three girls were wearing their school uniforms. Conaway's and Momori's uniforms were from the same school. Only the third girl was wearing a different uniform, and she was a middle school student. Momori couldn't even imagine what sort of assumptions people were making about their group. Being out on this cafe's open terrace was making Momori silently gripe to herself about the cold, but despite the temperature, People started to pour into the cafe once it hit lunch hour. All the customers let in by servers ended up staring at them. They must have seemed incredibly shady.
Actually, since the game ended, I've been making some inquiries and talking to people,
said Conaway. Mamori choked a little.
I've tried asking some questions about the Master. It seems the Magical Kingdom's negotiator has disposed of them in good order.
For real? They were dealt with? Said Mamori. The Master had been very literally like a god to them. They had met so many strong magical girls in the game, and some insanely strong ones too, but even they hadn't been able to touch the Master. It wasn't simple helplessness they felt before her. They'd been like ants before a giant. Mamori felt like they'd seen her as some kind of natural phenomenon, like a typhoon or an earthquake.
If they've been capable of dealing with the Master, they really should have done it earlier,
said Conaway. Clantail, the sober and taciturn middle school girl, Nene Ono, nodded silently. In order to fulfill her dream of becoming a zoologist, Nene spent every day immersed in study, but she'd also said that recently she'd begun to study cooking. She didn't seem like a bad girl, but when they'd first met, after Conaway had revealed herself as Flea, Nene's expression had said, "I see." But when Mamori had said she was Shadowgale, Nene's look had said, "Seriously?" And that it still bothered Mamori. While sipping her coffee, Mamori recalled the game's very sudden ending. They uncovered the space under the fountain and pulled out Noko, who had been hiding inside. Even though Noko had manipulated their feelings and tried to force them into a battle to the death, for some reason Shadowgale couldn't bring herself to hate her. Looking at the girl trembling under the blaring hot sun, any such emotions vanished. Noko was leaning on her shovel, thrust into the earth. Her face was pale, and she was trembling, but Shadowgale could tell that she was still trying to put on a brave front. Shadowgale looked at Clantail. Her expression as a warrior magical girl was now gone, and she was biting her lower lip, shoulders drooping, back slumped as she looked down at Noko. Even after Clantail had been scorched and had her fingers broken, now that she was on her feet again, she couldn't lay a hand on Noko. Pity and sadness seemed to have welled up within Flea, too. Shadowgale had known her for a long time, and she'd never seen Flea look at anyone the way she was looking at Noko now. They knew if they killed Noko, the game would be over, but Flea was still motionless. She looked as if she were desperately racking her brains to try to come up with some other way. Shadowgale glanced at the scissors at her waist. She just had to make up her mind, and she could put an end to this game right now, but she didn't want to. She understood Clantail's and Flea's feelings so well it hurt. Noko spoke, and it sounded as if she was mustering all her willpower and spirit.
Have you memorized the address and name that was in my magical phone?
I have. I won't forget, said Flea. Noko smiled. The smile was small and faint and seemingly on the brink of vanishing, but it left a startlingly deep impression.
Thank you.
So what's this deal of yours?
Noko grabbed the handle of the shovel and pulled it out of the ground.
In exchange for what I'm about to do, send a portion of the reward to that address.
She pointed the blade of the shovel at her own throat. Shadowgale understood what Noko was about to do. Noko could tell that the three of them didn't want to kill her, so she was going to finish the job herself. She was telling them they didn't have to dirty their hands, so they should please give her some of the reward. Shadowgale reached out to stop her, but then she pulled her hand back. Right now, even if she did stop Noko, it would be nothing more than hypocrisy. There would be no point. Shadowgale looked away, but even with her eyes averted, Noko's feelings came to her. Shadow Gale's face twisted, and she closed her eyes. Then the game ended. When they returned to the real world, Kanaway seemed sincerely glad, but Momori was not in the state of mind for that. In fact, what mostly filled her heart was guilt for what she'd done to Kanaway, along with regret. Kanaway said she was just glad Momori was alive, which made Momori glad but also even guiltier. And what was more, when Momori thought about what had happened in the game, Noko's end in particular, she couldn't help but feel depressed. After their return, Momori spent her days just sleeping and waking, making the people in her life very concerned. That was when they got a hold of Clantail through the magical kingdom. Back then, at the end, Kanaway smiled just a little sadly. She might have gotten us. Without saying anything more, she put her cup down. Momori got the gist of what Kanaway was trying to say. In that moment, neither Clantail, a combat magical girl, nor Flea, the pragmatist, had been able to touch Noko. Thinking back on it, Noko's magic had to have been affecting their feelings. Even after they'd found her out, Noko had kept on fighting alone. She'd created a situation where the three of them would have trouble finishing her off so that she could negotiate with them. Then she told them she would kill herself for them in exchange for part of the reward. There were some magical girls who fought, and some who did not, but that didn't mean that the non-combat magical girls were weak. Nene put down her cup. She was done with her cocoa. Kanaway's tea was long gone, as was Momori's coffee. "So then, shall we go?" said Momori. "Yes," Kanaway replied. "Let's buy some flowers on the way." "Do you have any prayer beads?" "Do you think I'd forgotten that? I'd forget that?" Kanaway replied. "Right then, let's go." They had 12 graves to visit. Last time they visited 2, and they had 10 more left to go. One of these visits they would include the serious job of somehow giving a large sum of money to a member of Noko's household. It would be just a bit longer until it was all over. Afterward. "Hello, I'm a magical girl rice bowl." This time, it was an unbelievable 2-parter. 2 grains enjoyed once. Putting it like that makes it seem like you're somehow losing out, though. But actually, you should think of it as getting to eat it twice. Yeah, let's go with that. The English subtitle for this book, Restart, means to begin again. Magical Girl Raising Project once more. I think it's a wonderful title. I've forgotten who suggested it, but when the decision was made that we would add an English subtitle to the sequel's title, all I could think of was Magical Girl Raising Project Pestilence. Fatal Infectious Disease. Or Magical Girl Raising Project Vomit. Throwing up. So to me, that subtitle was so resplendent, I couldn't even look straight at it. Writing a 2-parter had changed my work schedule a lot, compared to how it was before. My hobbies and preferences had changed because of it too. I've come to like 3-player mahjong more than 4-player, and when I pull a north tile, I don't think I've pulled a wind tile anymore, but yes, a Nukidora. I've come to love short story collections more than novels. I've become a might is right thinker. Like, maybe it's fine if by hunting, hunters kill all the wolves and foxes. I've become tolerant toward spoilers. I've come to figure that I can push myself on a draft, and it doesn't really matter if it's consistent with the other stuff I'm working on. I stopped putting Magiaka on my psyching myself up playlist. I've come to enjoy eating things that are easy on my stomach. I'm no longer able to complain about what's on Itomo. My surprise when the Pentagon showed up to the show, seriously? That's insane. Probably had nothing to do with this being a 2-parter. A 2-parter truly is a fearsome thing. to bring about so many changes. Alrighty then, I have a few more things. Some things have changed since the completion of Part 1, like who I planned to have survive and how many girls it would be. You might amuse yourself by trying to deduce who I originally planned to have live to the end. My motto here is to keep everything flexible. On a phone call to my youngest sister, my other younger sister once said, "The tech bell is clearly going to die." I have doubts about my sister for talking about that sort of thing on the phone. And then her daughter, my niece, heard it and apparently got mad and said, "A magical girl would never die." I'm sorry. I really am sorry. To the people of the editorial department who guided me, and to my editor, Esmera-san, who occasionally took jabs at me and occasionally saved me like a holy mother, I give my most gracious thanks. When I sent you a text at 5 in the morning and you calmly called me back, I got the shivers. Thank you very much. I also offer great thanks to Marui no Sensei, who yet again drew such wonderful illustrations for this book. My favorite is the scene where Melville is crushing Petchka underfoot. When I received that illustration, I let out a cry of wonder, making Esmera-san, who was on the phone with me, think something fishy was up. And finally, to my readers, thank you very much for purchasing this book. If we have another opportunity, I hope you will take an interest in my future works as well. And here's this. I was hoping we could meet again, and then while I was fishing up the previous volume, my wish came true. I'm glad I got the chance to draw this world again. I was able to decorate the cover with the nurse girl, and personally, I'm satisfied. I succeeded in my ambitions. I love nurses, and I love Shadowgale too. I love them all. Thank you so much, Maruino. And that's the end of Magical Girl Raising Project Restart. Wow. Are you excited for the anime that's coming? I know I am. Let me turn to face you. Hello. Thank you for joining me on a wonderful world of murder. I mean, magical girls. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. There's still a lot of Magical Girl Raising Project. Like, I will probably be at this for a few years, and I do not mind. I really enjoy going through these. If you didn't know, the next Magical Girl Raising Project book is actually a collection of short stories. It has 15 short stories, all of which mostly are actually pretty lighthearted, just cute little side stories that happen during the course of the first 2 arcs. So I was planning on reading 5 a stream, because then I would I like splitting the book in 3s. A few years, that's a lot of magical murder. It sure is. My next stream will be next Sunday night. I'm going to be playing more Pokemon. And oh, we have our schedule planned. We didn't post it yet, but we do have it planned. Tomorrow night, Snuggle will be playing One Shot. Tuesday night, Cuddle will be playing Spyro 3, original and reignited back to back. Wednesday night, Chalky will be playing Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and if she finishes early, we'll be playing Brawl Stars. Thursday, we have a guest headmate streamer of Pookie, playing some various Invader Zim games, Nickelodeon games for March 30 anniversary of Invaders Inn. Always happy for Spyro. Oh, I'm so glad you like Spyro. That's a lot of our, like, very high up in the special interest ranks. I think it's Cuddle's favorite, and a lot of our favorites as well. Let's see, then, oh, right, of course, next Sunday is my Pokemon stream, as I said, Pokemon Violet. I'm excited to play more of Violet, because right when I had to stop, it was right at the point where they completely opened up everything to me. So I'm excited to really be able to explore like never before. Spyro is a good Dargon. Okay, and I think I will raid someone named Fukama Songs. Oh, that also reminds me. Mouse, our headmate Mouse, will be doing Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog watch party with Fuki and friends over there pretty soon. We hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.